Good to have you here.
Hi, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm fine. The weather is beautiful, and that always makes life, a good 10% better,
Yeah,
despite what we're all going through at the moment.
yeah,
But I guess you guys, have got the added concerns around what's been going on in the political sense there as well,
yeah,
and all of the turmoil and uprising. So I don't envy you, even though your weather is probably more consistently better than my weather. But anyway,
yeah.
but it's nice to see your face.
Yeah, same here, same here. I've actually, well, Beirut is doing what Beirut does all the time, which is just going at it. We keep going at it despite everything.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, I've started this series of interviews, and I was actually just before we got onto the call, I was watching this kind of 45-minute video about your career, which is really cool. It's a really, really, really nice video to watch, and I figured it would be a great time for you to just walk us through the start when you started off as a roadie. So let's go to the very beginning. How did that happen?
How did it happen, me being a roadie?
Yeah.
Gosh, okay. So when I was 14 years old, two things happened. Maybe 5 or 6 doors down from me was a kid who was in my street who was about 18 years old, and he had an electric guitar. I had an electric guitar, and we ended up, playing together. He was a real boffin, this guy, and he built himself his own PA system. Now, I had been DJing aged 14, 15 in a pub where I lived, near where I lived. I shouldn't have been allowed in there at all, but they let me DJ in there twice a week, and I got paid a pint of beer and maybe £3 or something. I can't remember exactly. But in this pub were these hippies. It was basically a hippie pub. And these hippies had organized a free music festival, a completely illegal free music festival, for a couple of years, and which was amazing, in Windsor Great Park, which is behind where the Queen lives. There's a big park, and we'd gone onto this park and just set up stages and had a free festival, completely illegal. Of course, the cops freaked out, and that year they torn down the stages and made it really hard. So we thought, oh, well, we're just not going to be able to have another festival. Okay. Except that one day at the pub turned up a government minister, and he said, "You're the guys who've been organizing this festival." And we said, "Yeah." He said, "How about we give you a lot of money to go and make your own festival, but out of the way, not in the Queen's backyard." We had already given up on the idea of doing it in the Queen's backyard. "But we'll give you a load of money to go and do it and we'll give you an airfield, an old Second World War airfield." And they gave us this old Second World War airfield to use for like a month. And they gave us £100,000. And, that was unthinkable. So we had suddenly a festival that we could put on where we had 3 stages. It lasted 2 weeks, the festival. We had hundreds of bands coming and playing for free, right? And some of those bands were Gong, Hawkwind, Traffic, all kinds of things. So that was amazing. And I, aged 15 and a half, 16, was given the job of stage managing one of the stages. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but it was a baptism of fire. And then in between that bit, my friend who had built his own PA system, and he had been going out and roadieing for some of the punk bands, providing the PA service for some of the punk bands very early on. And in fact, this was just slightly before punk. So it was just as that moment where it was turning. And one day he called me up and said, "Look, will you come and help me out? I want you to roadie for me." I was like, okay. And it's a new band, and it is Lemmy's band from Hawkwind, and Lemmy had just left Hawkwind, and I'd met Lemmy because of what had happened at the festival.
Yeah.
So he played on the same stage. So, and he said, would you like to come along and roadie? So I was sure, turn up at this pub in Twickenham. And that was the very, very first Motorhead gig. So that was how I started roadieing. And then from then on in, I was kind of going off and roadieing for some of the punk bands around that kind of period, where it just really sort of got going and turned into punk music.
Yeah, and then so you did roadieing for quite some time, and then afterwards you decided to launch your own record label.
Yeah, so I saved up some money, and I was still living in my parents' house, and I was now 19, and I'd run into some bands and musicians that I thought were really amazing. And there was one kid I knew who lived down the road from a friend of mine who was just this incredible guitarist, and he had a punk band called The Outsiders that was really the first band to release an independent their own independent album. First punk band.
Yeah.
And that band had split up, and he'd formed a new band, and I'd gone and seen them. They were amazing. And I thought, you know what? And we ended up recording something together with me on guitar, him on guitar, and it was like an electronic experiment thing. And I said, let me put this out. I'll figure a way of doing it. So I went and recorded us in a studio all in one day. And then I had to go through the whole process of learning how to release 7-inch vinyl records, which there was no one place you could go to do this. You had to go to a factory to get the first, the lacquers made up. Then you had to get the stampers made up. Then you had to get the vinyl pressed. And then I thought, I need labels. I need somebody to design the labels. Then I thought I need a sleeve, have to get somebody to design the sleeve. And I just went to friends of mine. And then eventually I had the first 500 copies of this record, and I went and took a couple of copies down to Rough Trade, which was a shop in London, and in the basement of this shop sat the owner, a guy called Jeff Travis, and he would be meeting people all day, and he'd sit there with a pair of headphones on. He had a big afro, and he would listen to the music, and if he liked it, he might buy some of it to sell in his shop, but also to sell to other record shops around the country, and some for export to America, whatever. Anyway, he listened to the record and he went, I like this. He said, how many copies have you got? And I said, 500. And he said, I'll take them all. So he took them all off me and gave me the cash, and I went straight back to the factory and pressed another 500. And then all of a sudden I had a sort of small little record label, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And remarkably, that kept on going week after. He'd ring up, said, have you got another 500? Have you got another 500? And I was like, wow. And it went to number 2 in the independent charts. Band called Second Layer. That was the only time I ever, had a record that I played. No, that's not quite true. I played on a couple of other records that went in the charts, but that was kind of quite fun.
And then a time when education and being in university was considered as a huge deal.
University was a luxury. I mean, nobody went to university. I didn't know anybody who went to university.
Okay.
Not really. I mean, there was maybe 1 or 2 kids from my school. There must have been, but most of my friends and nobody really went to university at that stage. It just wasn't happening. So, but then I started putting out 7-inch singles of artists that I liked, and would write a contract on a little napkin or a back of a piece of paper saying we'd split all the profits 50-50. I didn't really know what I was doing at all. But then 1 or 2 of the records that I put out started getting some attention. John Peel on Radio 1 would start playing it. Mm-hmm. And of course, then people would go, oh, well, we're interested in this band. How do we book this band? And I'd get contacts. And then, so I kind of found myself managing these bands, Yeah. I didn't really know what management was, but somebody had to book the gig. Yeah. Somebody had to get a van together to drive to the gig. Somebody had to help them get the stuff on stage and off the stage. Somebody had to help them, put together some kind of plan. And it was me, right? So I ended up managing some of the bands on the label. And then one of the bands, which was the second single I put out, I decided to record an album with. So, and the album was going to cost me £500 to record, hire a studio for maybe 4 or 5 days and record this album. And I started recording this album, and we were doing gigs, and a lot of people were starting to turn up to the gigs. I mean, a lot. I mean, 200, 300 people.
Yeah.
And Warner Brothers had started a new record label called Corova. They had one band on that label called Echo and the Bunnymen. And the guy who'd signed Echo and the Bunnymen came down and saw our band play in a pub called the Moonlight Club in West Hampstead, which, funnily enough, I could walk to from here in about 10 minutes, which was a real cool little venue where I'd seen Joy Division and all sorts of people who played there. And Jimi Hendrix had played there in the 60s.
Really?
Right? It was called Kluk's Clique then in the 60s.
Wow.
This building's got an amazing history. I mean, like the bands that played there. Later on, I saw U2 there, all sorts of people.
Wow.
So it had a hell of a history. Anyway, we played there. They saw the band. We did an incredible show. And then afterwards, he said, I'm interested in talking to you about signing the band to Corova Records. And I said, well, look, I'm planning to put out an album myself. I've recorded it. We haven't mixed it yet, but I've recorded it. And he said, let me listen to the record. And he listened to what we recorded. And he said, look, it's great. Just need some tarting up, some mixing, blah, blah, blah. I'll do a deal to buy this album from you. Right. Okay. So he did a deal, and the album had cost me £500 to record, but he gave me £30,000 to buy the album. Right.
What?
Which of course went mostly to the band. Right.
Yeah, of course.
But it was like, and then suddenly we were signed to Corova Records, and we then had the beginnings of a career. So then they put that album out, and it got very well received. The band weren't a cool band, but it was very well received. Then they went out on tour. We went out on tour all over the place and had some wonderful adventures. Anyway, that band, The Sound, became quite a kind of cult band.
Yeah. And
their records today are being reissued all the time. And in fact, this week, that original single that I put out on my label in 1979 was just now reissued by an American record company. So it's The Sound's first EP. It's called Physical World. It's great. It's really good. The Sound were a big influence on not on Joy Division, on U2.
Yeah.
So Bono and The Edge came down and saw The Sound play, and they were really quite early on, and they were quite an influence on that on U2's sound. So it's worth checking them out. So that was the beginning of how I got into managing bands, and I kind of left the label behind at that point and just put out a couple more singles, but I concentrated on putting out, on managing the artists that were signed to my label. And then I had another band at that time that started to make waves as well, who were a kind of mod soul band. So that was the beginning of it for me.
Yeah, and this was this was at the point when you created Stephen Budd Management, right? Or was this?
Yeah.
This was the turning point, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was the turning point, and I sort of, at that point, with the soul band, who were called the Big Sound Authority, I had to really work hard with them. I mean, I worked hard with all of the bands, and it was a real labor of love. I loved them dearly. I was like writing the bass lines and stuff like this, and there was that much that I wanted to be involved in it, Yeah. And what happened was, I had to make I managed to get the band signed to MCA Records, which is now Universal, and everybody had said no. Nobody was interested in signing the band. Nobody. Right. And finally, the very last door that I knocked on was the one that said yes, and they signed the band for not much money. And then I started working on a plan to sort of hype this band into the charts, Okay. And I had them on tour with supporting Paul Weller, the Style Council, and people like that, and the Jam. It was first the Jam, then the Style Council. But basically, I would go with the road manager into the audience and hand out flyers, right? And on the flyers, it was said, please send us your name, address, and telephone number, and we will, in a stamped address envelope, and we will send you a free flexi-disc single, right? And we did a lot of shows, and in the end we had something like 11 or 12,000 replies.
That's great.
So I said to the record company, look, before we put out the first single of the band, I want you to, the only marketing I want you to do on this, because they didn't know what to do with the band. I said, just hire me a room with 12 telephones, right, for a week. And we hired a room, and all of the band, there was 6 of the band, 7 of the band, and then there was 3 brass players and the road manager and the girlfriend of the band. And we sat in that room and we called those 11,000 telephone numbers, right?
Really?
And this was in the days before there was mobile phones. So sometimes you get through, then if you wouldn't, you go like, well, when is Dave going to be back? He's going to be back at 7 p.m. He's going to be back at 9 p.m. And we'd have charts on the wall. Call these people at 7 p.m. Call these people at 8 p.m. Call these people at 9 p.m., right? Until we called those people and then told them where to go and buy the record, right? And they were so blown away to get a call from a band that they liked because they'd sent in their flyer.
Yeah.
They went out and bought the record, and the record went straight into the top 10 of the UK chart. And next week we were on top of the pops. And the record company was like, how did you do that? Right?
That's putting in the work. That's really putting in the work. Yeah.
They were like shocked, right? And then, you know, it was a good moment, you know? Anyway, so then they said, right, you've got a proper budget to go and record an album with a proper producer. And I was like, okay, wow. And I was thinking, what producers do I know? You know?
Yeah.
And I was a big David Bowie fan. So I you know, and my favorite David Bowie records were produced by Tony Visconti, who produced, you know, more than half of David Bowie's classic albums. And including Heroes and Low and, you know, everything. And of course, all the recent stuff that came out before he died.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I rang up the studio, which David Bowie's with Tony Visconti's had in Dean Street in Soho, and said, could I speak to Tony Visconti, you know? And I said, look, then they said, you can't speak to him, but what do you want? I said, look, I've got a band. I really like Tony's work. Wondered if he'd be interested in producing this band. It's a bit different from anything else he's done before. They said, send over a cassette. So I sent over a cassette, and the same day, I dropped the cassette in and put it through the door. And the same day, I got a call from Tony saying, can I come and meet you? And he turned up on his motorbike to my tiny little office, which, you know, had one desk in it. And he was like, I really like your band. I want to produce your band. I was like, okay. So I went back to the label and said, I've got Tony Visconti as a producer. Is that okay? And they went, how did you get Tony Visconti? You know? And then, you know, it's only because I just rang him up, right? Yeah. And so then we recorded the album with Tony Visconti, and I was in the studio pretty much every day, kind of just popping in and blah, blah, blah. And then during that recording, Tony's studio manager left, and who did all the work with him, who left his employment to go and do something else. And Tony asked me if I would run his studio, you know, and manage him. So all of a sudden I'm managing this band and I'm managing Tony Visconti, and I've got no idea how to manage a producer.
Because it had never been done before.
It had not really been done before, you know, so there was no sort of template of how to do it. And so in those days, the idea of a producer having a manager was a very strange thing.
Yeah.
And people didn't really have them. And, you know, so I was doing things like ringing up record companies and going, I manage Tony Visconti. We would like to work with the Smiths, right? And they go, excuse me? You know, and they'd be so shocked that David Bowie's producer would be doing this.
Yeah.
But they went, okay, great, fantastic. When can we meet? You know? And so I'd set up all these meetings, you know, and then, but I had to get that studio filled because the rental was extremely expensive. It was the first SSL studio. So we had an SSL solid state logic computerized desk, which cost a huge amount of money. And Tony would buy every single bit of equipment that you could possibly imagine.
Okay.
And so the overheads were very expensive. So I had to keep that studio working 30 days a month. And of course, Tony couldn't work 30 days a month. So I had to find other producers to work in the studio. So I thought, well, if I start managing producers, I can push them to work in the studio. So I'd heard this record called Planet Rock by Afrika Bambaataa, which I just blew my mind. I'd never heard anything like it. And produced in America by a guy called Arthur Baker. And really, it was pretty much one of the very first electronic hip hop records.
Yeah.
And where hip hop had moved from being real instruments into electronic, you know? And it was a very, very, very important record. Anyway, and I really wanted to go to America. I'd never been to America. And I got a budget out of Tony to book a flight as long as I went and stayed in a friend of his apartment in New York and blah, blah, blah. And I got to New York in the middle of winter, and I didn't know how to find Arthur Baker, but I was going to track him down, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say, how difficult would that have been? Because it's not like
Well, he was DJing in a club called Paradise Garage.
Okay, and how did you know?
And he had a studio, you know.
Okay, but how did you find out where he was DJing?
Oh, I just found out by asking people in New York, like, you know, where Afrika Bambaataa was kind of hanging out. There was another club called Mars as well.
Okay, cool.
And I went to these clubs, and then lo and behold, Arthur Baker was at one of these clubs, and I was screaming in his ear. He didn't seem very interested, but he said, "Come to the studio." So I turned up at the studio the next day or the day after. We sat down. And I said, "Look, I love what you're doing. You're doing remixes, which are great. How about I go and find you a bunch of remixes in the UK, and you can come over and do those?" And he was like, "Well, I don't really like flying, you know, at all. In fact, I don't fly." And I say, "Look, man, I can find you some serious work here, you know?" And he said, "Okay, give it a go," right? So I went and found him. I went back to England and I rang up the record companies and said, "Listen, I've got Arthur Baker." And they were like, "What?" I said, "Look, I've got Arthur Baker. If you're interested in him remixing your record, right, we can do this." And I set up like about 8 or 9 remixes for him. And he came over with his 2 engineers. We booked out 2 studios and started working with all these bands, you know, like Bros and Living in a Box and all sorts of people. And I can't remember who else we did. It was amazing things, but he brought with him like a couple of guys, you know. I ended up managing one of them, but the other guy was this tape editor he brought, who was a guy who all he would do is cut up bits of tape, right? And so Arthur would work by recording a pass, direct onto half-inch tape, and recording different passes. So, you know, to make an extended 12-inch, like you creating a groove, put the bass line down, blah, 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 bring in the other parts, record a pass, there you go. And then this guy would take those half-inch tapes and he'd cut them up and edit them into the master tape. And he had hundreds of bits of tape just around this. We had a little room, which was a drum booth, which we turned into an editing suite. Yeah. And this guy was a magician. And Arthur wouldn't treat him very well. And he was like, wouldn't give him a hotel to sleep in. He had to sleep on the sofa in the studio, you know, and he kind of treated him a bit disdainfully. And his name was Junior. And this guy turned out to be Junior Vasquez, right? Who is like one of the greatest DJs of all time, you know? And that's what he later on became. Anyway, so that's a long way round of saying that's how I started managing producers. And then I quickly, the producer management business outgrew just the studio because the producers wanted to work elsewhere. So I was booking them all over the place, and I took on other producers, and then I went independent, if you like, and had my own business managing producers. And that really worked. And that was in the late 80s, early 90s. And there was a lot of money in the music business. And there was, like, you know, some records were selling millions of copies, you know, millions and millions of copies. And we would be on a tiny little percentage. So a producer would be on 3 or 4% of the value of the sale. And I would be on 20% of the 3 or 4%, right? So I had a little pinprick, but because the records were selling so many, that was worth a good amount of money, and it was a good business to have, you know? And I was ahead of the game, and then lots of other people started managing producers, but I was pretty much ahead of the game.
Yeah, and what about today, like in today's context, when you guys, I mean, you still do this, you still have a bunch of producers on your roster, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, and how is that in today's context? Is it something that's...
It's a very different business, but I mean, before the pandemic, things you know, had been on an upward trajectory again because more money was being spent on recording, because streaming works, and because enough income for the record companies was being generated by streaming, they feel confident enough to put more allocation towards signing artists and to recording. And despite the fact that so many artists record at home or have their own home studios, there was still a need for outside producers, outside mixers, outside arrangers, engineers, working in proper studios, recording in the proper way, you know?
And so on top of all of this, which is already a crazy amount of work, there's an insane amount of festivals that you run or have been a part of. And I love the fact that many of them have to do with some sort of cause and are in some way high impact in terms of society. So, I mean, Afrika Express, the NH7 Weekender, the DMZ Festival, which is where was the last time we saw each other last year. PMX, you know, Passport Back to the Bars. There's so many different things. And like when you start a festival, when you decide it's time to get into this festival, first of all, is it an initiative that you take from yourself, or do you find someone who inspires you to go in this direction?
Well, certainly there's always got to be partners involved.
I mean, no, of course. I mean, on a personal level, do you decide I'm going to find a partner for this, or?
Well, it's more serendipity. Each time I look at it, strange things have happened that have then suddenly created a moment in time where you saw an opportunity. I'm good at, if I've got an idea, I'll follow through with that idea and dive in if an opportunity presents itself. So a couple of quick examples, 3 quick examples. So for the festivals in India, which are called the NH7 Weekender, and we're 10 years in there, it's now the biggest rock festival in India. That came about because I was invited by the British Council to go to Mumbai to judge a competition for the Young Indian Entrepreneur of the Year. And I met this guy there who was a music promoter, but who really understood how the Western music business worked. And that kind of Western music business wasn't working that way at all in India, right? But he wanted to import certain ideas. Anyway, he won this competition, and we went out that night to have a beer. And we were in a bar watching a band play, and it was an Indian indie band. And I said, had no ideas you guys were into this kind of music. And at that time, we were managing artists again. So we were managing Franz Ferdinand, the Kaiser Chiefs, all sorts of people. And I just said, wouldn't it be amazing to bring our bands over to India to do a special event? Because there seems to be a demand for Western indie music. We thought you were just listening to Bollywood, or you just liked Elton John and, you know, Metallica, you know. But no, because the internet had at this moment started to really take over, and because so many Indians were working in technology businesses and spending all their time watching YouTube and blah, 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 they really understood a lot about what was happening in the UK, what was happening in America. So I did, as an experiment, I said, let's do this. And the guy was super bright, Vijay Nair, his name is, and we decided to go into business together. And then I brought in a third party. Vijay then came over to London. I introduced him to Martin Albarn from Glastonbury Festival, and the 3 of us decided to go into business together. And we set up that first event, which was 5,000 people in Mumbai, in Pune actually, not Mumbai, in 2010. And we took over the Magic Numbers and Reverend and the Makers and a couple of other English bands, Asian Dub Foundation's first gig in India. And it really worked. And then the next year we doubled the size, and the next year we also opened a festival in Delhi, and the next year we opened one in Calcutta. And now 10 years in, there's 2 big established festivals of 30,000 people each with major international artists playing. So that was just serendipity, you know, just suddenly going, oh. And then similarly, Afrika Express was born out of a drunken conversation in a bar called the Groucho Club in London, where I bumped into a journalist when we were talking about just after Live Aid, not Live Aid, Live 8.
2005, I think it was 2004 or 5, something like that.
Yeah, 2005, I think it was. And that had happened, and we were kind of really pissed off because we were both African music fans. We got talking about music, and it turned out we both liked African music, right? And I didn't know this guy, and he turned out he was the deputy editor of the independent newspaper. And anyway, we started talking, and he said, you know, I wanted to do something with African artists. And I said, well, so do I, you know. And he said, well, maybe I could talk to Damon Albarn about trying to do something, because Damon's just been over to Mali in West Africa and recorded a record there. And I said, well, let's get together and have a beer and talk about it. So we got a bunch of people together in the Groucho Club, and we came up with the idea that it was a reaction to Live 8, because Live 8 had been about dropping the African debt. That's a great idea. And, you know, The Who and Madonna and Pink Floyd and everybody had played these concerts in London, this massive concert in London, but there weren't any African artists. Yeah. It was embarrassing, right? And we said, look, if you're doing a thing about Africa, have African artists. They're the best in the world. And the trouble is that they've been put into a box of, like, world music that only, you know, your dad or your uncle or your elder brother would go and listen to, but the kids weren't listening to it because it was like the world music section of the record, which was a good idea when it was originally created in the mid-90s, but it wasn't such a good idea 10 years later. So we thought, you know what, let's try and expose a younger audience to some of these artists by getting them to collaborate with younger artists. And so if you're a big fan of Beyonce, and you see Beyonce is working with X artist you've never heard of, you want to find out about that artist, because if she says it's great, you want to know, right? So that was the principle. So we started working around this idea, and we took a bunch of musicians out to Mali in West Africa for a week. We had some of the guys from The Roots and Martha Wainwright and Zane Lowe, who's now Apple Music, and Fatboy Slim and a few other people. And we spent a week in Mali playing with Amadou and Mariam, Salif Keita, Baba Mal, who else was there? Baseku Kuyati, these amazing people. And then we came back and put on a show in London, just a crazy, unrehearsed show in a pub. But all of the audience was musicians. In the audience was Franz Ferdinand, Kano, you know, all these kind of, and then they ended up jamming on stage, you know, and that was the birth of Africa Express. Yeah. So things like that. And then, you know, being in Korea when we were there for a music conference, and, you know, and Martin was, you know, typically drunk on drinking the local liquor, soju, and went up to the border and, you know, drunkenly said, oh, we should do a festival next to the DMZ. You know, there was this beautiful festival site with this waterfall. And it was like, let's do a festival here, man. And we get back home, and of course the Koreans have taken it completely literally. And 2 weeks later, they ring up and go, would you mind coming back? Because we think the festival's a great idea. Come and meet the mayor of Seoul. And we went back and we met the mayor of Seoul, and he said, you know, they're willing to put up the money to create this festival. So it's a long way round of putting it. But, and the amazing people from Zandari, which is the incredible music industry showcase event in Korea, organized an absolutely amazing festival. And then me and Martin Goldschmidt as well helped just sort of, you know, with ideas and plans and helping to find new artists for it. So it's things like that, you know.
Yeah, because this is the thing that I really like about what you do, is that you really open like cross-culture borders. So you've been always into this kind of like, you know, experimentation between two different cultures and so on and so forth. And given the certain things that have happened in the past few months with the COVID-19 and what's looking like in like a global recession and things like that, do you think that these sort of things are gonna happen? Like, I look at this in an opportunistic way. Like, I look at the positive side of it, but I just wonder, from your experience, where do you see this going? Like, whether it's the festivals, whether it's the gigs, and especially like being able to mix cultures, given that, well, we can't really travel and things like that. So for the time,
well, everybody's under the same conditions now.
Yeah.
So the sort of playing field has been sort of leveled, 100%. Right? Yeah. So it's just about your creativity and what creative ideas you can do and what creative connections that you can make, you know. And, you know, we've all got the same technology and the same ability to be able to connect. So, you know, the opportunity to do stuff it's really interesting. Of course, all the online events and are great. They're never going to replace the real thing, right? So please God, we can work towards getting back to the real thing. I have not been to a live show since Tony Allen's very last show, right? Which was on March the 13th, which was his very, very last show. And I got to say goodbye to him and everything. Fantastic, in a church. But I haven't been to a gig since then, right? So, and I normally go to 4 or 5 gigs a week. So, that experience of being in a room with real musicians and letting it wash over you is the best experience. That's the situation, and we're faced with, and everybody's faced with that. We don't know when things are really going to get back to normal, inverted commas, and if they will get back to normal. At the moment, I'm working on a big project to save music venues in the UK. Yeah. And I'm putting together 100 shows in small venues, independent venues, when they eventually reopen. And the idea is that we have major artists playing in a tiny little venue, right? The venue where they started off. So Coldplay in a pub in Oxford.
Yeah. And you've done something similar before.
I've done things similar before for War Child and for Amnesty.
Yeah.
But this is actually for the music venues themselves, because these music venues may not be able to reopen because they've not had any income for 6 months.
Yeah.
In fact, by the time things do come back, they won't have had any income for perhaps a year, right? So that's a real issue. So we need to create a huge fund that people can make emergency requests to have funding from. And the idea is of having these gigs happen with the major artists playing in the small venues. People buy a lottery ticket to be one of the 200 people to eventually go and see, like I said, Coldplay in a pub in Oxford, right? So we hope to sell hundreds of thousands of lottery tickets for these shows, and that money will go into a pile that people could then go and make an application to for emergency funding.
Yeah.
So it's things like that. Yeah, absolutely. These are the things that the cultural things, the things that give something back to culture as well, are the things that I enjoy the most.
Yeah, that's why it's always fascinating, because I always end up. It's funny because I met you in 2016 in Estonia, and we watched you presented the documentary of Afrika Express, which I advise everyone to watch, whoever is listening to this. And I was really shocked by how cool this project was. And every time since then, I ended up hearing about a project, I would always see your name involved, and I was like, this is crazy. Like every project that has to do with breaking a boundary, you're there doing it. So it's unbelievable. And that's why even like it makes me kind of happy to know that when I see, like, as someone who grew up in Nigeria and who lived there for 17 years, like when I see your love for Fela and your love for African music, it's really nice. And going on that, I want to know, like, how did that come about? The love of Fela and Nigerian music and African music as well.
Somebody gave me a tape. I've been aware of Fela, of course, and I'd heard Fela. He wasn't that well known here in the UK, but he was known amongst the sort of real music heads, and he'd of course started in the UK. He had been over here in the early '60s studying music, and he'd recorded a couple of albums here. He recorded an album at Abbey Road, Fela's London Scene album, but people were talking about it, but I hadn't really paid attention. I had actually, my first African music that I'd really gotten into was two artists, was Manu Dibango and Ozzy Bisa. Ozzy Bisa were a Ghanaian band who were based in London, right? Anyway, that kind of, funny enough, produced by Tony Visconti, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but which is really bizarre. But anyway, I got into those two bands, those two artists, and was heard of Fela, but he didn't have any, because it wasn't like he was on the radio with 4-minute songs. None of his songs are under 15 minutes, So that was, it wasn't on the radio, right? You had to kind of know people. Anyway, somebody gave me a tape that I listened to, that they'd made a kind of best of, a C90, and of course, there's no such thing as a best of Fela. It's all fantastic, right?
Yeah.
You know, and on this C90, maybe there were 6 songs. I was like, it's a C90 with 6 songs on it. It's just like, yeah, they're long songs, right? And anyway, I kind of got into listening to this and loved it and loved it and loved it. What is this, you know? And then I started collecting some of the records and then wanting to know more about the artist and it, you know, because there's so much depth to the history of Fela, right? Of what happened and how he was much more than just a musical figure. He was a political figure. He was a cultural figure. He was a mystic, inverted commas, even though a bit nutty. But there was a lot to delve into and learn about. And that's become a kind of, you know, major obsession for me, as you can probably see from behind my shoulder there. Those are some of the original Fela artworks, paintings there. That was the cover of, that one there is the cover of the biography called This Picture of a Life. And then there's an album cover over there, which was by Lemi Giaracu, who's the guy who did all of the, not all, but a lot of Fela's album artwork. So it's become a bit of an obsession, and I DJ out for fun at festivals and things like that. A lot of African music of the 1970s.
That was something I wanted to just point out on, which was last year when we had the DMZ. One of the major highlights for me was when you were DJing and it started raining.
Oh yeah.
We all went in front of the stage and started dancing, and I always say, like, that was just...
It was such fun, huh?
It was so much fun because all the songs, I remember just putting Shazam, trying to catch every damn song, and I was like, this is crazy. Like, I'm just going to spend the whole time Shazamming everything because I can't figure out. There was so much music that I had never heard of, so it was really, really, really cool. So hopefully we'll make that happen in Beirut. Well,
I hope so. I haven't really done any DJing this year because of what's happened.
Yeah.
I DJ'd in Kuwait for a New Year's Eve party. That was fun.
That must be random, but yeah.
Yeah, but and I was going to do a bunch of festivals this summer. Yeah. I'm going to go to, there's one festival in Europe that I'm aware of that's happening, yeah, which is Exit Festival in Serbia.
Yeah, going ahead with it, yeah.
And I hope to be going down there, and maybe they'll give me a DJ slot. I'll do it for free.
Yeah, do it. Just get back on stage.
Absolutely.
So just before ending this conversation, which again, thank you so much for giving me your time on this.
My pleasure.
Considering again context of today and the situation, if you had to give like a word of advice to artists in terms of how to make some income or how to keep their mindset, you know, positive in terms of what's happening, basically. I mean, I believe there's a lot of opportunity, but I want to hear your point of view on this. What would you tell artists, emerging artists, like the way to go is right now?
Well, you know, you're lucky in a sense, because if this pandemic had happened before there was such a thing as digital and online distribution that you can access, you know, easily without gatekeepers, then there would be very little opportunity, right? But because it is possible to, you know, using services like Amuse or DistroKid or whatever, to put yourself up on all of the streaming services. It's a question of how creative you can get around your visual production on videos, how creative you can get about putting on your own online shows. And, you know, the more invested and interested you are in exploring ways of using the web to promote yourself, the more opportunity you've got. Like we talked about earlier, it is a level playing field, right? But you can sell merchandise directly. You can go on Bandcamp and create your own records and sell them digital files for $1, whatever it is, on Bandcamp. You can then, if you're lucky, you can record in a recording studio and make a vinyl album, and you can be selling those at $20, you know? Yeah. So, but you've got to go and you know, take advantage of those tools. But, you know, the opportunity exists there, and people now are more open to music from other countries in the West than ever they were before. Yeah. You know, once upon a time, there was an enormous prejudice. If you said, "Oh, you come from Lebanon," people were like, "Okay, you know, whatever."
Yeah.
But now people would be going, "Really? You come from Lebanon? Fantastic. What have you got? Let's listen to it." Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, there's much more of an openness, I think, you know, and the ability to be able to kind of cross-fertilize with different musical cultures is a big part of that as well, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what I preach about this pretty much all the time. I mean, I give artist development Zoom sessions, one of which I'm giving this week on PMX as well. It's the sort of thing I preach about, you know, to give to just.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about PMX, which is Palestine Music Expo. Which
let's give it a few minutes because it deserves that at least. Right.
Yeah, that's a beautiful event that Martin Goldschmidt created, which I've helped him out with, which is in Ramallah in Palestine, once a year, a showcase event, 3 days of local Palestinian artists playing to both a local audience and an international invited audience. And that international invited audience is record company people, music producers, agents, managers, bookers, festival bookers, etc. And it's a really wonderful event, and it also gives people a chance to experience Palestine in a very different way than they might have imagined. And it's a bit of a challenge, as you can imagine, to put on and to get there, because you have to fly via Tel Aviv and then go through the checkpoints to get into Palestine. But it's a wonderful experience, and the quality of music and the quality of the people attending is really something extraordinary. And it's become an annual thing now. So Palestine Music Expo, go and search for that online.
Absolutely, it's something. Well, unfortunately, I cannot go there because I'm Lebanese to enter. But I hope one day I'll be able to, because it's a dream of mine to visit Palestine. So hopefully one day that'll happen, and hopefully one day well, it will happen soon. We'll be having a beer together.
Well, Tallinn Music Week is supposed to be happening in August, so I'm intending to go to that. I can't go a whole year without one music conference.
That would be a lot. Like for me, it's just to get there. I hope that things cool down between now and then. So let's see. Fingers crossed. Stephen, thank you again. Thank you so much. And I hope we'll grab a beer very soon. And
I do, and I hope one of these days you'll invite me out to come and DJ in Beirut.
It has to. You have my word.
Okay. Great to talk to you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.